to the Wing Space podcast, a place to take up space, a space for you to settle in, sit back, relax, and focus a little bit on health, wellness, faith, family, and this crazy thing called life.
This podcast is not a replacement for mental health treatment or professional health care. In case of crisis or emergency, please contact your local healthcare provider or dial 911.
Hey there, and welcome to the Wing Space podcast. In today's episode, Kristen Wilson, a therapist here at Hope and Healing, and I are going to talk about the importance of relationship communication, positive and effective communication in relationships. So, Kristen, it's great to have you with me today on the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Do you want to tell our listeners just a little bit about who you are and what you do here at Hope and Healing?
Yes, absolutely. I am Kristen Wilson. I primarily see couples here at Hope and Healing. I've been with the practice for about 3 years. And while I love being a therapist as a whole, I would say I am particularly passionate about working with couples. And I have done some Gottman training, which I really enjoy utilizing a lot of their great work into my practice.
What is it about working with couples that creates that passion for you?
That's a great question. I like being able to help people create change and outcomes that they want to see in their lives. And couples counseling often involves a lot of really good opportunities to communicate in a way that you're supported in telling your partner your needs, but also see change both in the therapeutic environment and take that to your home and use those same skills to see progress and outcomes there as well. And I enjoy when couples get to experience that and see the things working for them and seeing the efforts they put in place working for them. And I think I enjoy that part of it quite a bit.
You know, when we work with just individuals, we see their perspective, but when you're working as a couple, you're seeing both perspectives and kind of getting the whole picture. So that's
absolutely.
Yeah. Where do you think is best for us to start today? You know, obviously we want to talk about some of the important key components of communication in relationships, but of course we know there's some hiccups and some barriers along the way. So I guess I'll just let you start, whether you want to start with the positive parts or the negative parts or somewhere in between, and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. So I think one of the things to keep in mind when you are communicating, and Gottman talks about this when they're talking about compromise, like keep in mind you're communicating with someone you love. This is your partner. So while you might be very justified and understandable to have a range of emotions that you're bringing to the situation, if you can keep in mind that this is a person that you're engaging with, that you care for, and that you love, that will really go far to helping kind of set the stage for a conversation. One of the first things I always like to tell people about is the Gottman 4 Horsemen, because those are sort of the biggest things that will create problematic communication, right? And anytime we talk about communication, we never want to dismiss how someone feels. Behind whatever they're saying is typically a need. So we don't want that message to get lost. So if we can keep an eye out for the 4 horsemen, which are defensiveness and criticism and contempt and stonewalling, those things often play out hand in hand. They're not typically seen isolated on their own. But if we can see the message behind that and maybe reword or reframe what we're saying so that way our point gets made and our message is more clear to our partner, that can be tremendously impactful for couples.
That's good stuff. The 4 Horsemen, I think we'll probably talk about that a little bit more. I'm curious, could you tell our listeners just a little bit about what Gottman is? Because I'm wondering there might be some people thinking, well, what's Gottman? Maybe just a little snippet about what that is and maybe why you're passionate about using it in your practice.
Yeah. The Gottmans, Julie and John Gottman, have been at couples counseling for quite some time. So there are decades of interventions that they have tried and research that they have done and systems and tools that they have created that they offer trainings for, and you can utilize them in your own practice. I like it because it's very concrete. When people come to couples counseling, I like to help them see how we can create concrete change, not just discuss like theoretically how we would like to see things look different. I want people to feel like they are having the tools to move forward. And that's one of the things I like a lot about the work that John and Julie Gottman did is there are a lot of tools that we can utilize both in the session and then you can take with you and have as your resources so that way you can navigate things better at home. Typically, the interventions that we utilize, one, for example, is the gentle startup, right? Phrasing something that you want to say in the framing of, I feel, whatever it is you feel, like true emotion words, right? Not skipping over that to talk about like what caused your feeling. Really like true emotion words. I feel about what, describe the situation, and what is the need that's associated with that you're trying to communicate about. That's something really concrete that people can take and utilize in their home. And also, if your partner hears you stop and really utilize that phrasing, it's a reminder that you guys are working together. And when you see your partner trying, it helps you recognize your level of effort and how much you're willing to meet them.
Hey listeners, quick intermission with one of our providers at Hope and Healing, Kristen Wilson, LCSW-C, who has started offering a new program at Hope and Healing for our couples called Prepare and Enrich. So Kristen, could you give us a little more information about that program?
Prepare and Enrich is a service that we'll be offering to premarital couples. It is a strength-based program that utilizes assessment portion and then subsequent sessions to look at that assessment and discuss what are your strengths, what are the areas of growth, what are conversations that you'd like to have as you are leading up to and preparing for marriage. One of the nice things about Prepare and Enrich is that it covers not only a wide variety of areas, but it can be utilized with couples that are in different stages of life as well. So maybe this is your first marriage, maybe it is a blending of families that come into play when you are preparing for this. So the idea is that we can support you in that process and support you in having conversations with your partner and planning ahead for success. You can go to the website and send us your information and we'll get back with you, or you can give us a call.
For more information on Prepare and Enrich, visit our website, hopehealingtherapy.com, or call 301-690-8404, extension 0.
And that you're in the same boat together. So that's probably a really lengthy, roundabout way of introducing the Gottmans, but that is just an example of why I think that their work is really great.
Yeah, and you're right. It's decades of research. I mean, I guess they probably started in the 70s and they've just really honed in on what works.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
when you are working with couples, what are some of the things that you see as the biggest barriers or obstacles to having good, effective communication?
Well, let me say this. Every couple is different, of course, right? Every situation is different. And I would never want a couple to feel like when they come to receive services that they aren't getting a unique experience, because they absolutely are. It is 100% about where you are at, meeting you and what your priorities are, your goals for your couples counseling experience. But with that being said, oftentimes there are unhelpful patterns at play. They developed maybe out of necessity after kids were born, or just from length of time being together, or situational things at play. But somewhere along the way, the communication that likely started off well in the beginning developed into patterns that are not helpful anymore, right? I'm not saying that they're bad or shouldn't be the way it is. They're just not helpful. But because they're a pattern, they're often the automatic response that a partner will give. So interrupting those is a really important thing to do. Thinking before you respond seems easy, but it's not. It's really that action of, okay, yes, I do want to share this message. Check. I do want to respond. But how are you going to share it is such an important part.
Yeah, what are some tools that you might be able to offer to folks that are listening? And I guess before I even have you answer that, just in the few minutes that we've been talking, I know that this is such a bigger conversation. So I'll say to our listeners that assuming that she says yes, Kristen will be on the podcast a bit more so that we can dive into these things in more detail. But, here in the month of February, our theme is relationships and communication. So of course we have to have this conversation about couples counseling and couples relationships and communication. So what are some of the hallmarks of good communication according to the work that you do and maybe even what the Gottmans are saying?
Yeah. So oftentimes what gets you to a place of having good communication, it's not really just being able to be effective problem solvers in the moment. It's everything leading up to that, right? So when you have conversations, are you avoiding the four horsemen, right? Are you criticizing your partner, or are you defensive if your partner brings you a need, right? Your response or thought might be justified, but if it comes out as defensiveness, then your message is likely getting lost and you guys are both sort of talking but not absorbing. So setting yourself up for good communication by doing gentle startups, I feel, about what I need. But when you are in the process of having a conversation that you can see may be elevating or more of a conversation that possibly you intended it to, or you're setting out to sort of problem solve and talk, I highly recommend taking a beat to summarize and validate. So what that looks like is, if your partner, even if they didn't use the perfect gentle startup, even if they didn't use, the approach it in the best way, if you can recognize that your partner has a need that they're trying to share or a message that they want you to hear, and when they've said or shared what it is, if you can summarize what you heard them say and validate some part of what they shared. So does not mean that you have to rubber stamp agree with whatever they said. That's not real life, right? Every couple gets into disagreements. Every single couple. The goal is not to never fight again, right? The goal is to have conversations effectively. And if you do have a fight, be able to process and come back together in a much shorter time frame than maybe previously was happening. But when your partner, to circle back, when your partner shares information with you, you can summarize what you heard them say, even if you don't agree with it, and validate some part of what they shared. Then it will stop a typical pattern or a typical trap people fall into of talking louder or continuing to repeat themselves or feeling unheard. Nobody likes to feel unheard. So even if your partner doesn't agree with you, if you feel like they have heard you and understand what you are trying to convey, you guys are in a much better situation to problem solve together. And again, problem solve with the person that you love, keeping that in mind.
And sometimes I would imagine, we have the four horsemen that we talk about, but I don't know, defensiveness seems to be one that really just sticks out in my mind, because so often in the work that I do in my personal life, just kind of in general, you hear people say, well, I was telling somebody this and then they immediately got defensive. And I can imagine that if a partner says, I feel this way about a situation, we might sometimes automatically assume that that is a criticism of us and something that we've done, when really it's just a reflection on how I feel about a situation and doesn't need or warrant coming back with a defense, right? It can just be, I hear you. And, there may not be a resolution to it. It's just a matter of being heard.
We would call those stress reducing conversations, right? That's definitely one of the things we work on in the therapeutic process, is how to give your partner a stress reducing conversation. They're allowed to have all these emotions without them being your responsibility. And how can you support them in it?
And talking about supporting your spouse or your partner, understanding when they're coming to you for help, support, guidance, and when they're just coming because they need to unload some things. And I know I've certainly said that before, do you need me to help you problem solve this, or am I just listening, so that I know what it is that my partner needs? What does my husband need from me? He needs me to just listen. Okay, I'm just going to listen. Whereas there's certainly been times where I've said to him, I don't need you to problem solve this. I just need you to hear me. And he's like, okay, then he feels like he's off the hook, right? He just has to listen. So communicating what it is that you need can be helpful too, because sometimes we do just need to offload some stuff.
Absolutely. And to be heard. and to feel like your partner is on your team. Because that's a big part of it. When you listen to your husband and you hear what he has to say and you reserve giving feedback, right? If he just needs like a stress reducing conversation or vice versa, you all of a sudden, rather than feeling alone in your frustration, you have the support of your partner. And that's a much different feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It reminds me of a story. I'm going to say this and I'm not going to get all the details, but there was a woman who was trying to swim a really far distance. I'm bringing this up and I don't even know all the details, but the short story of the long story is that she didn't get all the way to the end and she couldn't see, like it was really foggy. And then she did it again and she could see the people on the shore cheering her on. They weren't swimming with her, but she could see them, and she made it all the way across this really far distance because she knew that she had support there. They weren't swimming. They were just there with her. So knowing that you have somebody right there with you can be really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We've talked a little bit about the defensiveness of the four horsemen. You mentioned criticism. How do we effectively respond to criticism?
Mm-hmm. It's defensiveness and criticism really do go hand in hand quite a bit. And the antidote to defensiveness is to take responsibility for some part of it. And I neglected to say that before, but if you find yourself being defensive about the situation, is there some part of that you can take responsibility for, right? So the example I always give is partner A says, you never do the dishes, and partner B responds back with, I never do the dishes because I'm always vacuuming all the floors, right? Defensiveness. Both of them have a need in that. Both of them have a message that they want their partner to hear. But if you can, instead of saying, I always do all the floors, say, you're right, I never do the dishes. That's a truth that they both agree on in that scenario, right? Start there. And then you can use a gentle startup. I feel about what I need to communicate to your partner. And really that is the answer for criticism as well. For the partner who is doing the criticizing, if they're overwhelmed by what they have to do at the end of the night, that's a good message for their partner to know. So put it in, I feel frustrated about always doing the dishes. I need us to make a plan for who does what every evening, so I have a break from that routine. And it's okay for partner B to say, if partner A is criticizing, partner B can say, I feel criticized, right? That's their feeling. You can share that. And if you have done some work with this, if you both have some awareness of what the things you are trying to avoid, these traps and things like that, and your partner says, I feel criticized, you can take a beat and reword it. Because really the goal is not to have your message lost. You likely couples are together because they love each other, right? They want to support each other. And oftentimes they're putting a lot of effort into that. I mean, it's really wonderful to have a partner who wants to support you. So we'll just harness that effort into places where your needs can be met and you can support your partner in the way that they need as well.
Yeah. And I certainly don't want to neglect the other two horsemen. We've mentioned defensiveness and criticism. Anything you want to say about the other two?
Contempt, I always describe it usually as building from a lot of unchecked defensiveness and criticism. None of these are things that if they're present, that means bad things for your relationship or anything like that. It's just, if they're present, those are the first things we're going to want to change, right? Mm-hmm. Because so that way we can start working more effectively. Stonewalling, I would say, is the one people are often most unfamiliar with. It's not engaging, right? So it's when you might say, fine, whatever you say, and you don't communicate about it. You don't give your partner an opportunity to communicate their needs, but also you're not communicating your own. And so then you stay stuck in the same problem. So stonewalling robs the couple of the opportunity to resolve whatever the issue is. It's when you walk away. It's those sorts of times. Not walking away because you've communicated to your partner, you need a minute to calm down. That's okay. But when you walk away and just never revisit the situation, because then it sits there, right? That's a really unhelpful pattern for a couple to have unresolved things building.
Yeah. Lots of big pink elephants taking up space in the room rather than just talking about them. Sure.
Absolutely.
So what do you say to the person that's listening that says, well, yeah, I mean, we have some issues communicating, but we're not that bad. What do you say to that person?
I always like to describe couples counseling as a tool for you, right? So if you have the job of cutting an apple, we'll say, would you like to use a dull knife or a sharp knife, right? Like can you individually resolve challenges within a couple's relationship? Absolutely. It happens all the time. Couples have a tremendous amount of strength. That's why they're together in the first place. And every couple that I've ever worked with has a tremendous amount of strength. So maybe this sounds a little tooting my own horn, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm like using the sharp knife. Why would you waste all that time smuddling through it with the dull knife? Like, engage a couples counselor, let them support you in it. And typically, I would say the feedback I get from people, certainly I can say I am hopeful that the people I have received good feedback, but I'm hopeful people are having a good experience in couples counseling. But even outside of our practice, I've heard from many couples who have received couples counseling in all different areas, and people typically really enjoy it because it's just supporting you, supporting yourselves. And that's why not use all of our tools, right? Why not make life easy on us? Life can be exhausting. So
Absolutely.
Let us help you out.
Yeah, absolutely. As we're having this conversation, I'm imagining that some of what you might offer to folks that maybe are not yet married, some premarital stuff, is a little bit different. So in an upcoming episode, we'll talk about some things to consider as you prepare to get married. But any last minute thoughts for those that are in committed relationships, are married, and just want to make sure that they're doing the best they can for themselves and their partner?
I would say overall, keep communicating, right? And if the way that you are communicating isn't working for you, try something new. You are in this relationship because you have a partner that you care about. Obviously, I should say there are some situations where there is trauma, et cetera, and I'm not necessarily speaking to those. But like if there's any active concerns about safety in a situation, I'm not speaking to those necessarily because there's a lot of other skills and supports for those that we could talk about another time. But in general, you're talking about like broadly for all couples, you're in this relationship because you want to support your partner, you want them to support you. Keep trying at it and be open to seeking help where needed. It is easy with how busy life can be sometimes to be stuck in a small picture. And if you zoom out and look more broadly about how you've treated your partner over a longer period of time, or what drew you to your partner and what characteristics and qualities that they have that are important to you, and focus on those and try and bring those back in. We really haven't talked about appreciation much today, but that's one of the huge things that you can do in your relationship to build good communication, is letting your partner know the things about them that you really appreciate. It feels good to be appreciated. So it doesn't have to be, well, they did this yesterday, but I did this today, or who's going to do it tomorrow. Just in general, I appreciate that we work together in the household, or I appreciate that you made coffee. It doesn't have to be these big epic things. It can just be the little things that happen day to day, and that can help remind you where you want your relationship to be or what you're working towards as a couple.
I've already have 3 more ideas for a podcast in just that little bit of information that you shared, Kristen. So more to come on this for sure. So thanks for joining me today, Kristen. For those of you that are listening, if you have thoughts or ideas, whether it's for Kristen or for myself or for our podcast community, you can always contact us via our DMs on Facebook or Instagram. You can also email me, Jennifer@hopehealingtherapy.com. Thanks so much for listening and have a great day.